I shall be revealing that I've jumped ahead a bit, but it's a banquet must wait for inspiration.
That was a very good segue. Well done.
We should delve into our entree and our coquille.
Well done. That was smooth, very smooth. But wow,
no, I agree. It's funny, isn't it? How I mean, I get stuck on pieces of writing. Like for instance, I wrote a short story a little while ago, or at least I finished it a few years ago. And it was in like most of my fiction, it was sat there in a state of just stasis, just stalemate for a very, very, very long time. And I just could not figure out how to write this story. And the problem was just literally, what voice should I use? What narrator should I use? What tense should I use? Stuff like that. I just couldn't get it to work. So I just left it alone, and I came back to it like after months of not having thought about it at all. And it's funny how often this happens. I just looked at it and it was obvious to me.
Glaringly obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's so odd, isn't it? It's that whole thing of being too close to the work.
Yeah, I finished it and then put it up on my Patreon, I think within a couple of days after that.
Yeah,
I know how this is supposed to be done.
This wasn't the one I did the audio for, is it, Jack?
No, this is
something different.
This is the other ghost story that I have lots of pieces of fiction sort of half done or three quarters done lying around, and I have to be sufficiently happy.
I'm not going to hold back. I fucking loved Calder's Run.
It was beautiful. It was a great story.
Because the thing was, I did a cold reading of it for Jack, so I hadn't prepped it. I just went for it, and I remember where I was in the house as well, because I was in a room I'm not normally in to do anything, and it was quite sunny out. I recall, but I got the chill while reading it. And I thought, I have to pause this.
Well,
and I thought, well,
thank you for that, because that's exactly and completely what I wanted to do with it. Like, that was my entire artistic project. Just write something that would make somebody.
Well, I thought if there was a creak in the house, a water pipe started or something, I was going to fucking yelp. And I thought, well, I can't have this on as my one and only take of this cold read. So I literally had to pause and went, hang on a moment, just.
It's hard to do with written fiction as well. It's very hard to do. But no, it was beautiful, Jack. It's a stunning story, that is.
I am rather proud of that one, I have to say.
Absolutely.
Every now and again, I'll get a message and somebody will say, oh, I've read it. And I get reminded that I wrote it. And it's always like, oh yeah, that's good. I did that.
It's nice. Yeah,
it is a nice.
No, the one I'm talking about is the other one that I released. It's called The Doves, and it was just in stasis for ages, and it was just that. I mean, the point of the story is it's that weird feeling where I went away from it and just left it alone and didn't think about it for I don't know, a few months, and then came back to it, and what had seemed a completely impossible, insoluble project, problem, just it was immediately obvious.
Yeah,
this isn't a problem at all. It's obvious what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And
then
it just sort of wrote itself.
That happens so often. I think that's almost like a universal experience, where you do have to put it away for a little bit after you've done that furious first draft or whatever, and just let it go, let it ferment a little bit, and go away, even forget little bits of it, come at it with fresher eyes, and eventually.
Absolute bugger for rewriting as I write, which is a terrible habit.
I'll kill you. That will.
That'll absolutely, completely stymie you, and I'm I'm better than I used to be, but I still do it. I still go back over and rewrite. But I'm better now, sort of pushing forward. Like, I know that bit it doesn't quite work, but it's good enough. Leave it. Onto the next bit. You have to learn to do that.
You do. You absolutely, because you won't get it finished. That's the thing. You'll never, ever, ever get it, especially if you're doing like an extended piece of work, like a novel or something like that.
Because what I'm finding at the moment is I'm in a very good place where fundamentally it's not changing. The structure is the same, the plot is the same, the character intentions are the same. But I'm finding these little moments. So, for example, today I had a moment where and it was glorious. I was like an 8-year-old because I went, I can't do that, can I? Oh, I can't do that, can I? And then I have this tremendous. I can do that.
You
and
can
I
do
just thought
that,
how
yes.
transgressive that I was
Mhm.
being with this particular character and this particular scenario. And it's like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I go back to the previous draft. But I, by the end of the day, I was like, oh boy, this is staying. This is staying, because it thrilled me for a moment. And
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, right? If it
So-
excites you, if it arouses you, then it's probably going to arouse the reader in some way, you know.
Yeah.
well, you hope.
You'd hope so, definitely.
You
Yeah.
hope so. Yeah.
It is. I think it is possible to do something which you're the only person in the world.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's always my
It
fear.
literally speaks to no one.
Yeah, that's always my fear, because a lot of my stuff is very strange. It's very idiosyncratic, and it's often very impressionistic as well. You know, a lot of my stuff is very, very peculiar.
But
And
there's
I
always
I
that.
often don't
there's
know if
always-
it
yeah.
works.
Maybe there's someone, some grumpy person out there somewhere who goes.
One of the ones I got published that I was accepted this month is a science fiction horror piece, and I've been trying to find a home for that for a little while, you know, because I did it.
Oh, wow.
It's one of those pieces that I think is very idiosyncratic and will only speak to certain people. You know, but you know, I'm just really pleased that it does speak to someone else and not just me.
Yeah. Cracking. Oh, that was fun.
It's very easy to get hung up on other people's bad advice. You know,
Yeah,
I still find myself stumbling over, like, you know, I like to think of myself as terribly independent minded, but I still find myself stumbling over received wisdom, you know, that I was told by somebody. You mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. And
God, the writing
you
was
must-
full of it as well. I mean,
Yeah.
just you know, the bottom line is everybody's got their own process. Everyone does their own thing, and everyone develops their own voice. So
I mean, you've got to sack
It's-
so much of that off. I mean, one of the things I
Yeah.
thought was outrageous that I found in a kind of, you know, writing 101 thing, and I was like, well, and it was don't mention the weather. It's like the weather is integral
right,
to
that's
to this story, because you know so no, I am going to fucking mention the weather.
Yeah, yeah.
Excuse me. Ridiculous
it's
things like
absolute
that.
garbage. I mean,
I'm
there are
knocking
not
that
many
back.
good. There are not many good books about writing. There are not.
No.
There are very few. I mean, one of the best ones I've ever read is On Writing by Stephen King, because his fundamental. He boils it down to two rules, which is read a lot and write a lot. And he says everything else is bullshit. Everything else is bullshit.
I had a fantastic piece of advice. I mean, it more pertains to the acting world, but I just thought, yeah, there it is. That's fantastic. We're actors and notices, actors and reviews,
Mhm.
and there's no hard line on this. Reviews come out, and some actors read them, and some ask if the rest of the company don't say anything, and you know that they may or may not read them at the end of the run. And I was working with the director and said, what's your gut feeling about this? I said, I prefer not to. And he said, yeah. He said, as a director, he said, my feeling is this. I feel let down by actors who read it. He said, because I've spent maybe 2, 3, 4, up to 7 weeks rehearsing with them.
Mhm.
And then a critic comes along and they completely change their performance based on a critic
Yeah.
they've never met, rather than I, who has been working with you for weeks saying, please do that, because that's the thing I really like you do. And he said, then I've come back after reviews to watch a show in the middle of the week and realize I've just got to tidy the whole thing up again and get actors back doing what they were doing, restore their confidence, really.
Yeah.
So because one random person's gone, I don't like what X is doing and Y is doing and Z is doing. Like, no, you can't, because you've now changed the whole story, and it's a domino effect, and it just knocks into the next thing and the next thing, and before you know it, it's so far from his conception and what you've agreed on. It's unbelievable, or her, or them. But yeah, but I thought, great advice. Don't read your own reviews for years.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to that notion of like media that's affected by, like, edited by test audience and whatnot, isn't it? In the process of being produced, and it ultimately it just results in this democratized, completely soulless piece of work. Ultimately, you know, that's what you get. You get slush, you get grayness,
by
you get
committee.
porridge.
Yeah, of which I have to say, being trying to outmaneuver Jack here in the segment. This cannot be an accusation leveled, certainly not at the first of these 2 episodes, which I was knocked out by.
Coquilles, I mean, he's always one that I remember. it always sticks in my mind. I mean,
it came a lot earlier than I seem to recall.
Yes.
My partner said this as well. She said, I thought this was much later. I said, I thought this was near the end of the season, to be honest.
So did I. I mean, I've watched it like umpteen million times, and it still kind of surprises me.
I mean, what I will say is, just as a way, just generally, how I'm feeling on this, because I am watching one episode a week, because we tend to, on average, reconvene every 2 weeks, is that what I'm really loving about it, to borrow and to get a little bit pompous and borrow a term from some French postmodernists, is it's so rhizomatic. It's treating Harris's creation in that way. It's germinating in all these varied directions. It samples him, but it twists it or inverts it. You know, Elliot Boudish is kind of an inversion of Francis Dolarhyde.
Yes.
There's these little moments from the novels and the films, but they're pulled from their original
little
context, and parodied or satired or turned on their head. And then we get, you know, these impressions of characters we've gained from other media and other films and novels, entirely flipped. And one of the things that came through very strongly in Entree, I'm not going to go too far ahead, but was how Gideon is so much more akin to the representations of Lecter in the Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs films than anything in Fuller's series.
Totally designed to be that. Totally designed to be that, yeah.
The wonderful thing I'm finding with these episodes is now it's starting to feel so liberated as a piece of art and entertainment. It goes anywhere, it does anything. It's broken down, or it's at least breaking down its initial formula much more. It used that thing to get on air and to make it palatable to executives. And now it's dispensing with it as much as it can. And we're in this new territory. And I just was.
Well, Coquilles is really interesting because it exemplifies that. It technically swerves back to the serial killer of the week format, but on a much deeper level is a complete subversion of that format. I mean, in Elliot, again, what you really get here is exemplified and just thrown completely in the audience's face. Okay, these serial killers they're operating on a level that is not literal. Okay, these characters are expressions of a sort of wider thematic state. They're expressions of what's going on with Will and the wider relationship between him, Hannibal, Jack, Alana, and so on and so forth. I mean, technically, Elliot Boudish, he's taking it even further. He is kind of like a premonition of what you're going to get later on in like the third season when it goes completely metaphysical.
Yes. It's go on, Jack.
Sorry, no, please go ahead.
No, please, no. Honestly, because I started us off.
Well, I agree. How do you pronounce this, by the way?
What, Coquilles?
Yeah. Is that it?
Yes,
Coquilles? Yeah, Coquilles. Yeah.
Yeah,
I believe so.
Coquilles. Yes, it's
oyster shells. Yeah.
Did I try? Yeah. I try, because they look like wings when you open an oyster. Yeah,
of course, yeah. And there's also lots of other freight there as well, isn't there? You know.
Isn't it?
I mean, it's so interconnected. Or you could, I mean, I've decided, really sort of on the strength of watching Coquilles, that one of the things I'm going to do when I release these conversations on my Patreon, which you very kindly allow me to do a little bit in advance before you put it up on your channel, is I'm going to try anyway to put little audio clips in for, you know, sort of the scene or the exchange or whatever in the episode that I feel stands for the episode the most, or that I find the most interesting. And really, that idea came from the fact that I was watching this episode that we're talking about now, and I couldn't decide. I was thinking if I was going to quote a bit of that, you know, where do I start? Where do I end? The entire script is quotable. Every line seems to have at least two meanings and seems to refer to other things that are happening. You know, Hannibal smells Bella when he's pouring her wine, and he smells her cancer, and then he tells the story about learning that he had a very powerful sense of smell when he was a boy, and he knew that his teacher had cancer before the teacher knew. So he's telling Bella that he knows
Yep.
that she's got cancer.
And then he takes it further at the end of that conversation when when she's objected to the fact that he's served foie gras, the cruelty of it. He says to her, well, the next course is pork, Bella, and I assure you it was a particularly supercilious pig. He's kind of saying that to her, isn't he? For rejecting the foie gras. There's so much going on here.
Yeah. Do you know, the thing I love about that dinner scene is I think, I mean, I really think there are only two ethical positions. You eat no meat, or you eat all meat. And Hannibal gets more of a pass from me than people who pick and choose which creatures they get upset about. I mean, there's lots connected to that. I mean, there's an awful lot of racism embedded in reactions to certain mammals being consumed because of different practices, different religions, cultures. So that's something we all know about as well. But I would be Hannibal before I'd be a fucking pescatarian.
Totally, yeah.
I know what you mean.
How I know what you mean. Yes, I can't. Personally, I can't sort of ethically weigh that either. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's all or nothing. And interesting as we see, one of the things, and
all or
very
nothing,
much,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. And Hannibal is actually in these episodes, and it's something I want to keep an eye on. But he's never played as by Mads, and presumably Mads is working very closely with Brian Fuller and the directors and the writers. There's no relishing of murder. So there is a coherence to his ethical stance about unnecessary cruelty, as he calls it. Now, I think there's layers of ambiguity in there and maybe even a certain amount of contradiction. But as I say, it's one of those. I just had the conversation partner because we're both we're not, neither of us are meat eaters, and I said, I would be Hannibal before I would be in the area of trying to find a hierarchy of species or trying to find well, I'll pass it, which probably makes me sound insufferable, but there you go.
No, I totally agree. It's an interesting thing. I mean, you do get a certain contradiction even at this dinner table. I mean, there is that whole conversation about how emotions are a gift from our animal ancestors. Cruelty is a gift that humanity has given to itself.
Terrific line.
I mean, what a beautiful line. What a fabulous line. And it really does get to something essential about Hannibal, which we spoke about in the last episode, which is his ability to see the artistry and the beauty in anything, including cruelty.
And there really is a sense in which Hannibal has the most secure ethical position of all these people, re food and re many other things, despite the temptation to skip on to sorbet, which is because that's I skipped forward because I watched Coquilles and I watched Entree, and Entree feel as good as it does feel very much like part one of something. So I just sort of naturally went on because it's also on the Blu-ray disc that I've got, so it just went through and I just watched it. And Sorbet is arguably the episode where things really kick into high gear in the series. Believe it or not, up till Sorbet, the series has actually been playing it softly. Sorbet really is the moment. It's the episode that contains, I believe, the first actual on-screen violent crime that Hannibal commits. It's the episode that makes it clear that he's the Chesapeake Ripper. You get body parts and blood everywhere. It's real, but without really getting into that, there is a real contradiction between the way Mads plays Hannibal as a killer, and we start to see that in definitely in Entree, and then very much so in Sorbet. There's a contradiction between how Mads plays Hannibal's killing and how Will describes him. Definitely, how Will describes the Chesapeake Ripper. Yeah, they don't go together because Will has this view of the Chesapeake Ripper as this person who has contempt for people. They're just pigs, worthless pigs. And Hannibal, as I say, as we talked about before, the thing about Hannibal that I see all the time is that he's fascinated by people. He loves people.
And in fact, he uses the cooking and the eating actually to honor them a lot of the time, to exemplify them. Like he takes parts of the killers that he admires, right?
It seems more like Budish, the Angel Maker, than it does the Chesapeake Ripper, even though Hannibal is the Chesapeake Ripper. And there is, again, Coquille, wonderful episode. Every line means two things. Everything that happens, everything everybody says, refers to something else that's going on in the story. Every character has a mirror in another character. So one of the things that's happening in Coquille is that Budish is killing quote unquote bad people. He's taking people who are really, they've done terrible things. They've committed rape and murder and things like that. And he's not punishing them. I mean, this is Will's interpretation, but it's backed up by the other things we see. He's transfiguring them. He's giving them the opportunity to become angelic, to be saved, really.
Yeah,
he's
it's a kind of mercy,
to
isn't
be,
it? It's a kind of
to him,
divine
it's
mercy that he's
salvation.
practicing.
Yeah. And then he's doing that because he wants them to then sort of speak for him or watch over him in his twisted worldview.
Yeah.
So that has a real echo. We don't quite get it yet because, as I say, it only becomes clear in Sorbet. But Hannibal is also, in his way, he's killing bad people. Although to Hannibal, it's being supercilious. It's being a supercilious pig. That's enough.
Yes.
You don't actually have to be a killer. You can just be a supercilious pig, and then he'll kill you.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that George alluded to earlier as well about that title, because you end up going down rabbit holes. Because I think with anything like this, anything that seriously takes itself this seriously as a piece of work, is that everything is chosen for a reason, and that title sent me down the rabbit hole of reading about the great scallop, and how pregnant it is with symbolic implications. I mean, biologically speaking, it's the creature that hides itself, disguises itself, covers itself, and this is one of the things I found very interesting about it. It even allows other sea creatures in its vicinity to provide its camouflage for it.
Interesting.
And all these things seem to have a semiotic connotation within this story. So we're getting, and obviously, I mean, the obvious thing is we're getting past the shells of all the characters and into the gooey mess underneath. Of course,
very much so. Even the most in control, the seemingly most authoritarian and in control characters, like Crawford, right? Like Jack. Yeah.
But
I mean, this is a very Crawford-centric episode, of course.
Yeah. But I still really relish that we have that wonderful audience advantage in that we know who and what Hannibal is.
Yeah.
And we know that the other characters around him are yet to know. But even here, and especially in Entree, we are now beginning to see aspects of Hannibal that are surprising. So, for example, and it's beautifully played by Mads.
Oh, I know exactly the scene you're going to talk about.
That rage at Freddie Lowndes' article. And we have never seen this side of Hannibal.
It makes me clap and laugh at the screen.
Incredible.
I love it to bits. He does nothing. Mads does next to nothing, and yet because you're so used to by this point, you've learned exactly
the vocabulary of his physicality, if you like.
Exactly that. We're used to his syntax, so we can feel it, and it's actually quite disturbing, isn't it? I love how cute it is. It's the one of the very few times in these early episodes where you see him losing control of himself to a degree. You see him actually losing that very reptilian facade that he puts on, and he's feeling this sort of proprietary rage that his good name has been sullied and it's been taken away from him. How dare this person?
Interesting how he is someone who operates as someone who is aware of being watched, because we're very rarely in situations where Hannibal is not present with other people, and there is this sort of super controlled. I mean, the dinner scene is obvious, but even in scenes where he's almost incidental. And yet here on his own, and we are his only spies, and he, of course, is unaware of us. And just that little moment, it's incredible. It's incredible insight into this into Hannibal. Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, in this version of Hannibal, that's one of his primary motivations, and certainly one of his primary character traits. It's his greatest weakness in many respects. It's his exhibitionism. He wants. I mean, and this is something that Bedelia identifies much later on when they're having their powwows. Their sessions. He wants to be seen. That's why he's so obsessed with Will, because he sees in Will, although Jack is absolutely right, at the moment Will is getting it wrong. Will is getting his assessment of the Chesapeake Ripper wrong because he's looking at it through a narrow sort of like prescribed lens of the profiler. He's looking at it as the profiler, so he's looking at it moralistically, really. Hannibal wants to be seen. Hannibal sees in Will the opportunity to be seen in his entirety, to be known in a way that no other human being could see him or could ever want to see him. And that's the romance. That's the source of the romance here.
Well, again, I'm desperately stopping myself skipping on to Sorbet, where you get the introduction of Bedelia du Maurier and Hannibal's conversation with her, and the famous exchange about the person suit. And you realize that Hannibal is lonely. That he's awkward when he talks to her. And it becomes clear that we've just had the scene with him and Franklin, this gauche and awkward patient of Hannibal's, and then you go straight to Hannibal as Bedelia's patient, and Hannibal is almost as gauche and pitiful as Franklin. It's another example of that mirroring thing that happens throughout this series, where characters echo one another, where they're not quite literal, they're not meant to be taken literally, they're almost like parts of a wider whole that have been separated. You see that in these episodes too. My God, in Entree, it's all the way through, isn't it? You see, obviously, you've got the introduction of Miriam Lass, who is the Clarice Starling of this show, and was in fact intended to be Clarice Starling, but they couldn't get the rights to her, so they made her into a slightly different character. She's an evolution of Clarice Starling, in the same way that this Hannibal is an evolution of the Hannibal that we've already come to know, and that this Will Graham is an evolution of the Will Graham that we already know. She's a little bit more like, she isn't Jodie Foster's Clarice. No. That's for damn sure. Jodie Foster's Clarice wouldn't survive in this universe, I don't think.
And it is that curious thing with Hannibal as well, and in this iteration of him, how dependent on structure he is. Everything is is an ideal. Yeah. So everything from the presentation of food to the suits, the everything, and yet there are those wonderful little slips and insights. Not only the review, reading the bad review effectively, but one Jack spotted, so Jack should really say about the books.
I love that. Yeah.
That is such a great detail. I did not notice that one.
Jack, please tell us. It's for the benefit of the listener.
I think it first becomes just visible in Coquilles, in some of the shots where Hannibal is on his balcony and talking to Will, who's down on the main floor. You just start to be able to make out some of the spines of the hardback books that he has in his shelves upstairs, and then it actually becomes, with a bit of help from the pause button or the screenshot, it becomes easier to see in later episodes. A lot of the books on Hannibal's shelves are crap. Frankly, they're trash. They're Robert Ludlum and Virginia Andrews and Jeffrey Archer and stuff like that.
That's brilliant. That's a Brian Fuller joke. That's definitely a Brian Fuller joke, and highly conscious. That is the kind of thing Fuller does insert into his shows. Little references and whatnot. I was reading. I do believe Miriam Lass, her name. She's actually a reference to one of Fuller's previous shows. The name is the name of a character from another show, and there's a little bit of sort of like cross-pollination going on there. It's that. I love that though. I love the notion.
Has sort of characters turning up.
Yeah.
From, I think there's at least one character from Wonderfalls who turns up in Hannibal. I can't remember where it is, but
my God, that notion that Hannibal likes Big Mac literature, that appeals to me enormously. Price,
You'd think it would all be Rimbaud and Baudelaire.
Exactly.
He probably does read those as well, but then he puts one of those down and he thinks, I think it's time for some Dan Brown,
It's time for some Maeve Binchy,
Fantastic.
It may have started as just set dressing, and we need a load of books, and we just get a load of books, and we put that in. It's fine. We'll shoot around the fact that some of them are titles like that. We always see them in the distance, out of focus and stuff. But somewhere along the line, somebody decided to allow us to see the spines, even just fleetingly.
I'm going to be looking
reminds
out
me in
now,
a way
because
of,
I wonder if they continue that joke. I wonder if it evolves throughout the show. If there's other stuff that you can spot that's.
I'm going to be watching out for it.
Because that sort of it reminded me a little of. I worked with an actor once who had been on one of the Poirots with David Suchet back in the day, and he said, and Suchet is renowned for being unusually for a lot of classically trained British actors, not, and they flip over to the method at some point, and he's very embedded in, or he was very embedded in being in Poirot, so he would just sort of stay in character and everything. And he said, we're doing a scene, and it was a scene in a library, someone's private library, and what happened? And suddenly Suchet said, no, the books are all wrong. They're all wrong. And he's moving the bed. This title was not, this is anachronistic. And the director's trying to say, we're doing everything in soft focus, David. No, it's not. And had all the books changed so that they were correct and also followed the mindset of the owner of that private library, and that they all had to be just held up, because it was basically his baby at that point. No one was going to argue.
This is it.
Obviously,
the sort of things an actor can get away with when they're literally irreplaceable.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God! And British actors do that a lot, don't they?
Wouldn't know.
There's a lot of performances that should never have gotten out of the editing suite, which are up there on the big screen. Yeah, I'm obviously thinking Alan Rickman and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, that kind of thing.
I don't know. I think Rickman was probably told to go for that. For the pantomime. That's the impression. Yeah, I get the impression that everybody was in on that joke. I like that, but it's funny. It came up. I was just chatting with somebody on Twitter the other day because somebody had mentioned Paddy Russell, the BBC, the television director from the 60s and 70s, and she directed several Doctor Who stories, and she directed two with Tom Baker, in the 70s, and her Tom Baker stories are in my opinion, they're his two best performances in the role. And that can't be a coincidence, if he just happens several years apart from each other, he just happens to give his two finest performances in the same director's stories.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It's because Tom, as wonderful as Tom is in many ways, Tom, as I think many people have said, was sometimes very, very difficult to work with.
Yes, well, he couldn't stand her, could he? That was the thing. He couldn't stand Paddy Russell. And I think
he didn't like it.
And it put him in a certain mode as well as a certain mood, which works.
Yeah,
because she was forcing him to do things that he did not want to do.
Well, she stood up to him. She used to say, right, enough of this nonsense. Do as you're told.
Yeah, rein in his excesses a little bit. Yeah.
Nobody else, well, very few other people had the courage to do it, because Tom Baker's this, he's physically huge and imposing, particularly
and his
back
voice
then in the 70s.
As well,
His voice, and he was the star of the show. And at that point, he was one of the, Tom Baker as the Doctor in the middle of the 70s. He was one of the biggest stars on TV, and he looked upon it as his baby, and he was replaceable in a way that Suchet wasn't, because Poirot can't regenerate. But even so, he was a very alpha personality, let's put it that way. If he decided he liked you, it was fine. If he decided he didn't like you, if you were a guest director or a guest actor or whatever, he'd make your life a fucking misery. But Paddy Russell just didn't have any truck with it. She just used to
say, basically,
stop that. Do what I want. Do what I want.
It's funny. It's funny you should mention people from the 70s though, because when we were watching Entree, my partner said to me, "Oh my God, doesn't Eddie Izzard look like that actor?" And I'm going, "What? That actor from the 70s? He turned up in things like Doctor Who." And I was like, "Do you mean Frederick Jaeger?" And I was like, "Oh my God, he does. He looks exactly like Frederick Jaeger." So now I have this headcanon Hannibal, in which it was all made in the 70s by the BBC, with Jaeger as Hannibal and someone like Christopher Neame as Will Graham. And it was like, it was killing me. I was like, no, don't make any more comparisons. But he does. He's absolutely dead ringer for him.
I believe the name Abel Gideon is derived from one of the proto names for Hannibal himself. Actually, he was originally going to be called Gideon Quinn.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and that's it's another case of this mirroring thing going on because, of course, Eddie Izzard's Abel Gideon is Hannibal from the books and from the movies,
he looks midway between Brian Cox and Anthony Hopkins as well.
I mean, even the timbre of the performance, right? It feels the introduction, the framing of the character, the way he operates. It's much closer to the Hannibal from the books and from the movies that we know of. And it's in a way, it's kind of wry. I mean, for me, there's a certain wryness to it. It's almost like Brian Fuller and the creative team are saying, right, okay, well, this is your Hannibal. This is what you know. Here's ours. You think you've got the ultimate serial killer? No, you don't.
No, you haven't.
They go to town in Entree, mirroring set design and shots from Silence of the Lambs as well. They really do. Like the sets are, they're not replicas. They're not the same.
They're better.
But they are spaced. They're spaced the same way. They have the same amount of space, and things are the same distance from each other.
Yeah.
Chilton's office, the corridor with the cell, the chair that Alana puts down is, spatially the relationships are exactly the same, and the cameras are in the same place.
The camera movements, yes, things like that they sort of echo that opening sequence from the Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. There's a hell of a lot going on, and very deliberate.
It's quite acerbic. It's quite sort of. Yeah. It's quite here's the old crap version.
Yeah. That's what I get from it.
It's basically,
that's what I get.
It's staking out its territory. It's staking out its territory. It's saying we're transcending this. I have to say, just as an aside, Raul Esparza, Dr. Chilton, just backed his head on. That is the role I want to play. I mean, if someone said you can have any role in Hannibal, I'd say give that role.
I love Chilton in this show. So I love him. I mean, in the books and in the previous films, he's very one note. He's just a shit. There is nothing else to him. He's a totally irredeemable shit who you want to see get eaten by Hannibal. That's it, isn't it, really? This version is slightly different. There's the way he plays him, there's a haplessness to him.
Well, they pull this magnificent thing of pseudo-intellectual idiocy. Yeah, and that's the great. He gets it all wrong.
I've got one note about this character, and it's Starfucker.
Yeah. I mean, his reaction to Will is an incredible scene. I mean,
isn't it? He's not charming enough to get away with it. He's not good. He's not clever enough to get away with it. But he's trying to sort of wheedle his way into this little charmed circle where you've got Alana, Hannibal, Jack, and Will. Right? He's trying to sort of like, I could get in here. And this interesting person.
Entree, other than I'm back to my hobby horse about going down rabbit holes about titles. But Entree, other than being like an hors d'oeuvre of sorts, it also means the right to enter or join a particular sphere or group. That's Freddie, that's Chilton, that's Gideon. They're all vying to be in a group or the star of something, or he being the star fucker, as you say.
Funnily enough, it echoes all the way through the show because you get. I mean, this is going well ahead. This is right towards the end. Hannibal basically states outright Chilton's entire character. He says to him, people who become famous have the right stuff, Frederick, and you don't have the right stuff.
No.
And it's like, that's it. That's Frederick, right? That's what he is. He has this kind of like hapless desperation that is played so subtly. That's what I love about it. It's subtle, but you can feel it radiating.
I think he's actually, his performance is very cleverly modulated because he plays at the utmost you can play without sabotaging the tone of the thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's very. He's smart.
Close to be. I mean, there's a campness to Frederick Chilton, which I love. I absolutely love, and it does get a little bit more camp as he goes on, but it never goes over the edge. It never tips over into parody. Chilton in this show is quite queer coded, I find, but not in a negative way. It's not sort of like the queer coded villain or anything like that. It's just his nature. It's very naturally played, and it gives him, because that lends him an almost comedic quality. It plays very well against character. I mean, Hannibal's quite queer, obviously very queer coded as well, but it plays very well against the more stern characters like Alana, who is very, very stern, and Jack in particular. I love the sequences with Jack and Chilton in this show. I think they work very, and Will. I mean, Will has utter contempt for this guy immediately. Utter and complete contempt. Will has more time for a lot of the serial killers that he encounters than he has for characters like, say, Freddie Lowndes or Chilton.
I don't know about you. I have an instinctive empathy reaction to characters like this because I feel more like a Frederick Chilton than I feel like a Hannibal.
Yeah, sadly so.
I'm one of the Arnold Rimmers of the world, you know. So
it reminded me, in its way. It's funny that the thoughts that cut across your mind. One of the things that it reminded me of was, do you remember those old episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation with Barclay, who was this kind of sweet, a bit hapless, and the. I think maybe one of the first episodes that introduced this character, every interaction he had with the crew, the main crew, the regulars, suddenly the main crew, the regulars, we see a side to them that I found reprehensible. They were horrible to him.
I want to strangle Wesley in that episode. I mean, even more than usual, obviously. You know.
And there's and the knock-on effect was I said to my partner at one point, I said, this reminds me. It's like the Freddie Lowndes sequence as well. I said, when accomplished people get together and someone who they don't approve of, I said, this is a really hard scene to watch. I said, because it is bullying. I said, but it reminds me of this Star Trek: The Next Generation thing. And I said, and actually, in a way, it reminds me of what I think is the single, because I love Next Gen. It's comfort viewing for me, but there is one particular episode of it which I hate with my entire marrow of my being, and it is the one I just cannot rewatch ever. And it's one where Picard is set one of those occasional conundrums or tasks by the Q entity, which is he doesn't get to become the man he is. He ends up having a different life, and the life is totally framed by the episode as being meaningless, worthless, and looked down upon. It's an incredibly neoliberal episode, like right down to its bloody toenails, and it's so difficult to watch because it is tantamount to an episode, institutionalized bullying. It's horrible, and I got that same vibe, but where it kind of works. Yeah,
you can imagine like corporate human resources trainees being forced to watch that episode. Can't you?
Yeah, definitely.
But I think where Hannibal, the series, gets away with it is that we are not being presented as we are in Star Trek quite clearly. These are your utopian figures. These are your idealized people, and they're so good and they're so fair, and they're so, well, no, they're not. They're part of a military command structure, and they are really reprehensible at times. It's actually something I've sort of enjoyed over the years of watching how awful Jonathan Frakes makes Riker, where I think it's actually decision on his part at times. I think he's trolling his own character.
Well, let's not forget, I mean, Chilton is accomplished. I mean, despite how the show frames him, he is an accomplished guy. I mean, he's not. He is quite eminent in his field, for however hapless or disinterested in it he might be. Because as Hannibal identifies, that part of the thing between Hannibal and Chilton is the fact that Chilton isn't really interested in what he's doing. That's what offends Hannibal about him. Yeah. He only cares about fame. That's what he wants. He wants the accolades. He wants to be in the limelight.
There's also something very human about that. There's something totally. And the thing that I think the point I was trying to make in my circuitous way was that this is an entree. This is a group. Will, Hannibal, Jack, maybe to a lesser degree Alana. You don't want to be a part of.
No, it's dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous.
So it gets away with this kind of scene, as in the Freddie Lowndes
Chilton thinks
and
he is part of it. Chilton actually is in part of the. He kind of feels that he is part of the charm circle, and in a way, he's.
Well, so does Abel
veiled.
Gideon, and this is the
Exactly,
wonderful
right.
joke about it. This is the great gag about them: is that they're not.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
He's trying to cheat his way in.
Yeah,
that's what the
Freddie
whole thing
Lounge sees it, though. That's the great thing about the Freddie Lounge scene. She's like,
exactly.
about when she says about chewing bubblegum with you guys and everything. So I see right the fuck through you.
Yeah,
you want me
does not want to be part of that club
for a reason.
I mean, I that scene where they have her in, and I could slap Will in that scene.
Yeah,
he is so arrogant and condescending and insulting. Yeah. And I love Freddie in that moment. Bottom feeder though she is, I love her because she just basically says to them, "I don't care what you think. I care what you think of me."
Yeah.
One of the things give a shit.
And she throws back all of their judgments right back at them, doesn't she? Right back at them. They assume she's not as Will in particular assumes that she can't be as clever as he is, and of course she is. She is.
It's
that
moral disdain. It's that priggish sense of moral superiority.
And it's interesting because that's what Hannibal's trying to puncture in Will. Hannibal sees the potential in Will, and he knows that it's his morality that's holding him back from being what he could potentially be.
It's his great failing, isn't it? When Will gives into that side of himself, he becomes arrogant and gauche and unpleasant and boring.
That's a brilliant choice that Hugh Dancy makes in that scene, where he ends up almost having Will insult himself because he uses the very genuine thing where he struggles with eye contact, and he does it pointedly with Freddie, and it's a great choice by the actor because it's like, you're not normally this pronounced in your inability to meet people's gaze. You're doing this for effect.
There's a really interesting sort of visceral hatred between Will and Freddie. I mean, Freddie doesn't necessarily hate Will. She's afraid of him. She kind of like Hannibal in a bizarre way. She sees the potential in him. She knows of which she speaks, despite her position as a tabloid online journalist.
And Will has effectively been misogynistic towards her. I mean, he squared up to her and basically threatened violence on her.
Part of why he doesn't like her is because she does see it, and he's so reluctant to see it. He's so reluctant to accept it. But she does.
He's threatened by how clearly she sees him. I mentioned in an earlier episode that when Freddie is somebody who just says what she needs to say to get what she wants at any given moment. But the bit where she's talking to Abigail about Will, and she says he's insane and he's dangerous, that strikes me from the way the actress plays it. Is it Lara Korostecki? I think her name is. I'm making an effort to remember character names and actor names. The way she plays it, she seems very sincere in that moment. She actually she plays it like, this guy is dangerous.
Well, that's the most interesting thing.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because it indicates that there is a moral agent there underneath it all.
That's what's so interesting about this incarnation.
Loathing of her look like he's threatened by somebody who sees him that clearly.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that reluctance in Will, isn't it? It's what he fights against Hannibal with as well. It's that notion that, there is something pupating inside of him. There is something that he's been resisting all of his life, perhaps, that is much greater, much worse than what he would ever hope to be. And it's something Hannibal sees. It's something Freddie's afraid of, but it's something that Hannibal loves. It's something that Hannibal adores and wants to see flourish.
Yeah, that's the difference, isn't it? Freddie and Hannibal both see Will to a great extent, a much greater extent than Alana does. They see him more clearly than Alana or Jack, but they have different moral reactions. Hannibal's reaction is just aesthetic, whereas
that's Freddie's
is actually sort of more conventional moral. Yeah,
interesting for Freddie, right? Given what she is.
Again, it's interesting, isn't it?
But it is something that Will sees too. We see it in Coquilles, right? In that final, when they find Budish strung up as his own angel in his barn, he has an hallucination where Budish sees Will in the same way that he sees all of the terrible people that he's turned into angels. The fiery head.
For me, that scene, particularly that shot that you just mentioned, is so key to what my thing about this series has always been: the way it inhabits Svetan Todorov called the hesitation, because he has his theory of the fantastic, where it's basically split into the uncanny and the marvelous, and to be sort of very crude about it. I mean, the uncanny is when something is basically unreal, within a story, and the marvelous is when, I'm being very crude about it, but the marvelous is when the supernatural is real. There is an actual supernatural intrusion into the world, and he talks about the process of the story before we find out which way it's going to fall down, if it does, as the hesitation. And I love stories that are full-throatedly supernatural. I generally prefer them to stories that do that sort of constant dance, because they generally don't do it very well. Like, I don't like the Babadook because it does that, and it doesn't do it very well, and it actually does fall down on one side. It falls down on the side of it all being psychosis and hallucination, but it just pretends that it doesn't. And lots of things do that. And I don't like that. One of the great things about Hannibal is that it manages to sustain that hesitation pretty much all the way through, because a lot happens in these stories that can very easily be interpreted as supernatural. I mean, Will's gift can be interpreted as psychic, and that's never confirmed, but it's also never refuted. Lots of things happen, particularly interestingly in these two episodes. In Entree, we start to have Jack Crawford having what could be psychic visions, psychic visitations, images of the future, and they're not. You can interpret them any way you like, and the story neither disavows the marvelous interpretation,
interesting,
nor confirms it. And for me, it's so Coquilles is really the one which announces this thing that the show is going to do so clearly by almost falling down from the hesitation point. It gets so close.
It gets really close, doesn't it? It
really does. And the scene is that scene where Will is on his own with Budish's body, and he turns around and Budish is now on the ground. He talks to it. And what you get, and of course, after a little bit of conversation, Will looks around and Budish is not there, and he looks up and Budish is back in hanging from the rafters, and everything's back to normal. And you can say, well, it's just Will's hallucination.
Yes, it's his encephalitis, right, flaring up.
Yeah, that's a perfectly respectable interpretation. But while that's happening, while he's having his exchange with this vision of Budish, you get a POV shot of Will from Budish's point of view.
Right.
Now, this is what I think is a really...
That's very hard to interpret in terms of, every visual text has a philosophy, as it were, of what the camera is, whose eye the camera is. And the camera will say, I am this person's eye, I am that person's eye, I am God's eye. Essentially, that's what it's saying. When it's not inhabiting the point of view of any character, what it's saying essentially is, I am God's eye, I'm the audience's eye. It's essentially the same thing. In that moment, it becomes the point of view of a dead man, of a ghost,
the angel Budish, right?
An angel, and it sees Will as having the demonic fiery head. And one of the things, again, it's been established that Budish somehow has the ability to sense people's moral status. It's never, it's the thing about he kills people who are murderers and rapists and things like that. And he knows if you're naughty or nice.
And what does he make of Will?
And then Will says, and every time this comes up, Will or Jack or somebody says something like, well, he thinks he does. But the thing is, he does.
He does.
He does only kill people that have done evil things.
That's the thing, right?
He does know.
So he does know. It's almost supernatural, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It takes it right up to the edge of falling out of the hesitation into a version of this text where the marvelous interpretation in Todorov's terminology is endorsed. It doesn't quite do it, really, only because it doesn't then continue. It just stops there and then doesn't ever confirm itself, as it were.
No, it's wonderful. It's something the show does so well, where the abstract and the actual breakdown, that distinction kind of breaks down, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to muck about with, the distinction or the division. And like you say, Jack, a lot of shows, a lot of products try to do that and do it very badly indeed, because they're too literal or they're too one way or the other. The balance, it takes it right to the edge. It provides you so many explanations.
Different take on it, only because of the unique way I watched these episodes, and it just so happens that so I'm very glad, Jack, you went there and that scene in particular, because it was one of the things that impressed upon me. So, I've got one of these lovely serendipitous moments, because we double banked it with, we've been working our way through Lynch's Twin Peaks, and we're on the Return series,
right?
Now.
My God.
We're on Twin Peaks: The Return now.
Just to very quickly interject, Brian Fuller very consciously, when he sat down to start planning this series, he actually very consciously said to himself, what would David Lynch do if he was doing a Hannibal Lecter series?
Brilliant.
This is very interesting, and this is where I think that this might actually impact on where I'm going, because there was one you were saying earlier, Jack, about certain there were just a plethora of lines in this that really stood out, and any one of them could have been used as a kind of sketch for the whole thing, or a synecdoche of the whole thing, or whatever. And the one exchange for me, because we double banked it, and it didn't occur to me, because we watched Hannibal first, then we watched our episode of Twin Peaks: The Return afterwards, was the exchange with the police officer. Do you have a history of sleepwalking, Mr. Graham? I'm not sure I'm awake right now. And I got this very strong Lynch, we live inside a dream from Twin Peaks about this. And it just linked into some of the things that you've been saying just there, Jack, which is, in a sense, both shows, and it's really interesting that you said that Fuller was consciously doing this at times as well. They both work hard, from exactly what you were saying, to merge the signifiers and motifs of naturalistic television with more stylized and surrealistic things. Yes, that's obvious. But Hannibal, it seems to me, or it occurred to me as I was watching these two things back to back, Hannibal takes place inside a dream, inside a reality. The lens is, if you like, distorting. Twin Peaks takes place inside a reality, inside a dream. The lens there doesn't distort so much as show what is an idealized version of a naturalized environment, which is built out of all sorts of, Frank Capra-esque myths about American society, and, the balm over great evil. And so it was tempting for me, just in that moment, to read both series as unfolding almost in the same universe, so that demons, for want of another word, clearly cross into people. Hannibal, clearly, we've talked about this as Hannibal being an extension of the kind of Milton's Lucifer. But then Budish not only sees demons, he is himself not entirely natural, and it is that scene. There is no way he can kill himself in the way he does in that scene without some kind of elaborate mechanism we don't see to achieve it. And I think that's the ultimate image for me. And I'm really glad you homed in on that scene. We see things that shouldn't happen in that moment. We see a suicide that can't possibly happen without technology, and there's no sign of it, or assistance, and there's no indication that there's assistance. We see a camera angle which is impossible within the logic of filmmaking and television. I mean, literally, the only thing we're missing from the end of this episode is seeing Mads Mikkelsen in one of those comfy armchairs surrounded by red curtains, because because they are occupying such a, and of course it's serendipitous, and you're bound to make connections when you watch something back to back. But it's like, oh my God, the repeated line, "We live inside a dream" from Twin Peaks, and then to have that line from Will Graham, "I'm not sure I'm awake now." One is doing the inverse version to the other, it appears to me. One is a dream inside reality, which I think is Hannibal, and the other one is reality inside a dream.
And you get permutations of that line repeated in every season. There's one, I believe, in season 3 where and this is leaping well far ahead, where Mason Verger threatens Dr. Bloom. You're dead, Dr. Bloom. And she says to Mason, "Oh, Mason, don't you know we all are?"
Yes.
And it's like, yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. You are operating in this Dantean nightmare. You've all suffered your own deaths multiple times over. And by that point, every character has kind of experienced their own. Some of them more than once. You know, I'm looking at Chilton in particular, which the show loves to murder, by the way, in various elaborate ways.
Deaths and resurrections.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they killed Chilton.
I mean, they're all mythological as well.
Sorry.
I mean,
Ignore me.
You know, you bastard. No, I'm not going to do the South Park thing. No. But
I can't help noticing that these two episodes in particular, and I think it's actually true of the series as a whole. Now that I think about previous episodes, there is a lot of emphasis on beds. There's loads of scenes where Abigail is in bed when she's talking to people. There's the scene where Jack Crawford and his goons strong arm Freddie Lowndes in her hotel room, and a load of that centers on a bed. But there's a huge amount of emphasis on sleep and beds in these two episodes. People are constantly sitting on beds
as well. I mean, taking that to its link to the plot. I mean, Boudish making angels to watch over him as he sleeps, ostensibly, and then you get this lovely scene with Will having the dark angel with lots of paganistic symbolism while he sleepwalks and nudging him on too. I'm nudging you down this path. That is my MO for Will Graham, thinks Hannibal, and having those two sequences in juxtaposition, so effective.
Yeah,
there's a wonderful line in Shakespeare that I love. I think it's from The Tempest. The reason I can't ever remember where it's from is because it's quoted by Lovecraft at the start of one of his very early dream cycle stories. It's the line, "I have an exposition of sleep come upon me," and I love that line, and I think that's what's happening in these episodes.
That's kind of what we're seeing.
An exposition of sleep. We're seeing people learning through dreaming and constantly sort of trying to disavow. Is it the dream?
It's Midsummer. It's I have an exposition of sleep come upon me. Sleep thou, and I wind thee in my arms. It's fairies be gone. It's that scene. It's that scene. Yeah. Yeah, great. Yes,
I shall call it Bottom's Dream because it hath no bottom.
Yes. Great. Yeah, that's a great line. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does really explain it kind of in a very poetic way. It defines the metaphysics of this show.
And also, I mean,
an exposition of sleep.
It's something that goes through all these episodes as well. And forgive me, I think it might have been alluded to earlier, but this I think it was you, George. So forgive me. But that murder as transformations, murder as becomings, the alchemical thing that underwrites so many of the murders in these series, whether we're angels, we're demons, we're part of the soil, or in Hannibal's way, you just meet, at least I can make you look presentable. And again, it's like that. I mean, I said right at the top of what I loved about this series was that it's really rhizomatic. It's just an excuse to basically say it allows me to go off on tangents. And as we did in our intro episode, and I said, because it was that stuff in the air when Thomas Harris was writing. And one of the things I tend to come back to when watching the series, because I can't help it, it fills my head, is that Outside album by Bowie. Because again, I just kept thinking all the way through this episode of this idea, which is the premise for the album, the young girl who's turned to art, but her killer is implied to be a kind of paganistic creation, merging man and beast, Greek mythology. It calls itself a minotaur. It's made in an artist's studio and then is released into the labyrinth of Oxford town. And with the horns and with the wings, all that kind of neo-paganistic stuff that creeps into this episode. And again, although it's displaced by nearly 20 years, but Thomas Harris obviously, the point when Thomas Harris is writing is closer to the album than when Fuller is doing this program, but it's so resonant with those things. And again, I was just struck with this. Wow, why was this in the air? Why were so many different artists, so many different creative figures, so obsessed with this idea of a kind of murderers, or firstly murder, but murder beyond the kind of serial killer slasher thing. Murder as art, murder as alchemy, murder as a kind of neo-paganism, scarification, why did this catch fire at that time in the way it does? And I don't really know if I have any answers for it, but it's a fascinating phenomenon. And of course, watching that one last night and thinking, oh my God, this image of Buddhish, and it's so redolent of imagery from the lyrics of that album, and but glorious. But it's just an aside. But
no, absolutely, it's beautiful. I mean, in the next in Entree, of course, we have another sort of semi-mythological image, which is the Wound Man.
Yes,
recreated, and in one of the most brutal murder scenes we've had thus far, one of the most brutal murder flashbacks when Will does his thing.
Did you notice
I
this?
have to look
that?
away. It's one of the very few where I kind of have to look away.
Did you notice in that that Will's gift, if you like? It's a small thing, but it's kind of rather like Jack saying about the unusual point of view shot. The window wiper or whatever it is, that it was thinner.
Yeah.
The gap seems to be thinning between Will and the murders. It was, and of course, it's the most vivid one he's had.
Yeah. Well, we get to the point where he
noticed
doesn't use it at all, right? He doesn't. He starts not using it at all.
Does it just come in?
It goes away. Yeah.
I just noticed that the actual effect itself, it was a thicker bar. And I went back and checked because I thought maybe I've invented that for purposes of underscoring a point that might be completely
I think you're right.
It's different.
I think you're right, completely right. That mechanism degenerates. It goes away. It becomes the whole phenomena becomes more sophisticated.
Makes so much sense to his character arc. But I must say,
that's Hannibal's influence, isn't it?
Yes,
really, it's Hannibal's influence making him more what he is supposed to be. Like Will shies away from this gift. Obviously, he tells Jack, of course, he says in the previous episode, "This is bad for me.
Yeah,
this is bad for me because it's taking me away from what I feel I should be. I think I will be dangerous if I allow myself to follow this path." And he is so right. He's so right.
He doesn't quite say that, though, does he? This is one of the interesting things I noticed on this rewatch, is that that's obviously what Will is trying to say to Jack in that scene. He's trying to say, if you keep me on this, if I keep doing this, I will become potentially dangerous to other people. But he doesn't quite say it because fundamentally he doesn't really want to stop.
No,
and
he doesn't.
He knows that he ought to stop.
Yep.
He wants to stop, but he doesn't actually want to stop. This is one of the things that I noticed in these episodes. The interesting scene where Will and Jack have their public argument. Will snaps at Jack, and Jack says, "I didn't hear that," and everybody else runs away.
It's hilarious.
It is good, isn't it? But what's interesting there is that Will he immediately backs down. He apologizes. He says something to Beverly Katz later, like, "I was out of line." He completely retracts, and backs down and sort of rolls over and shows his belly and submits. And it's what it is, I mean, I read it as fear that Jack will take him off the task force, despite the fact that really the problem that he's having, the problem that is causing him to have these feelings of anger and frustration towards Jack is that he wants him to take him off the task force, and he won't.
Yeah,
it's one of the great things about the series, actually, that it seems to me to keep returning to. One of its sort of core anxieties, and I don't know if they resolve it, but this idea that it's preoccupied with the notion, do we as individuals have a dynamic something that is us, or are we just what the greatest number of people believe us to be? And these two episodes in particular seem to be really juggling with that. Is Will Graham or any other characters Buddhish is perfect for it because he is losing his mind. That's the medical explanation for what is happening. He knows he is going to die, and similarly as with Bella, they know they're losing life, they're losing individuality, and then we see these subsidiary things like Jack, sides of Jack. They haven't seen sides of Hannibal. They haven't seen, but it does seem to me that this, particularly pertaining to Will, because that's almost like the master or the overriding narrative. I think I keep thinking that's what it's grappling with.
I
And
think
it's
so.
very
I think you're
interesting
right, because Beverly states
Hannibal
it.
also seeks psychiatric help.
Yeah, Beverly
So
kind of states it. She states it
really
in
does.
that interaction with
I'll
Will
be us.
after he snapped at Jack. She says something along the lines of, "I felt like the first time I heard my mother use the F word." It's that she's expressing in a sort of childlike way what happens when your assumptions of someone are shattered or punctured in some particular way, and that's exactly it. It's this deconstruction of assumptions of identity.
It's that moment when you realize that your parents or parent is not like this supernatural Olympian force that provides love and food and everything, or but is actually a person in the same way that you are a person. It's that
and that
moment
breaking down of Jack is like very deliberate over these 2 episodes, of course, because he's father, he's daddy. So. That's the point.
Well, there is actually an exchange towards the end of Coquilles where Will. Jack says to him, "I'm not your father. I'm not going to tell you what to do." Will Jack essentially throws it, but in a very passive aggressive and manipulative way, because Jack can't not do that. He throws it back to Will, and he says, "Oh, do what you like. I'm not your father. I'm not going to tell you what to do." And of course, he is telling him what to do.
Of course, he is.
And Will basically calls him on that as well.
Yeah, he says, "Sounds like that's exactly what you're trying to do, right?"
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's his language with everyone, isn't it? I mean, his Jack Crawford's language, even with Bella, which on the surface actually appears. I mean, if you're, it could be framed to appear actually very understanding about putting her needs first, and then you dwell on it for a couple of seconds, and you see how manipulative it is, how controlling, how he cedes responsibility to others constantly.
Yeah. He defers because he's actually quite deficient in certain ways. And you see that really exemplified in Entree and in Coquilles as well. The way he talks, the language that he uses, the way he's written is very, very, very deliberate. You've got all of these phenomenally poetic, sophisticated characters surrounding him who talk in abstractions and illusions and metaphors. Jack never, ever does. No. He speaks literally. He states his feelings. He states them outright. "Oh, he's very charming, isn't he? Is there something I can offer you physically, romantically, or spiritually to help you?"
Now, literally, those lines could have been written and spoken in the most, in such a different way, as being such an example of true empathy and not clouding the situation with your own wants and needs and your own ego and your own vanity. But it comes from Jack Crawford.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh.
And it's Lawrence Fishburne's Jack Crawford as well, who is such a particular. I think I feel sorry for Lawrence Fishburne sometimes in the show, because it feels like he does sometimes get lost amidst these stellar performances that he's surrounded by. His Jack Crawford is so essential to the entire poetry of this show. The dynamic, the structure that holds together all of the other characters around which they turn.
And the performance is genuinely brilliant.
Yeah,
he really is.
So
this is one of the
good.
great strengths of the show, is that it has this absolutely cast iron, brilliant supporting cast. Like we were talking about Raul Esparza earlier. He does a wonderful job with Chilton, because he is the slimy, pretentious, insinuating character that Chilton essentially is, but he's also vulnerable and needy, and he's not a bad person. No. He just and he's it comes from insecurity and stuff like that. And he puts it all in there. And Jack Crawford puts all Lawrence Fishburne puts all Jack Crawford's manipulative and domination of other people. He puts it in there, but he plays him as essentially the way he plays those lines we were just talking about, they're like lines that you would get from a sort of a self-help book, about how to be a caring partner and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And he's quite urbane in many ways, the way he responds to people. But I think it's that Jack Crawford, I think he even knows what he's doing, and I just don't think he cannot do it. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think he knows how to stop.
I think what's particularly upsetting about that scene is that is because it comes after that, I think, incredible moment when they're interviewing Budish's estranged wife, because again, it reminds me of that beautiful subversion of the the police tell the family of a murder scene in the first ever Twin Peaks, because it's I mean, it's a cliche now, but Twin Peaks was among the very first things to ever pull that thing. The police turn up at the door, they don't say anything because the family just know. And this is done in a different way, but Jack piecing together that information is so well executed. And
it's so well done.
You are so moved by him in that predicament.
Yeah.
And then they follow
Also,
it up 2 scenes
Will
later with
noticing that
chat.
something's happening, but not being able to tell what it is as well.
Yeah.
It's got a
by
Hall of
following
Mirrors
it-
effect.
Yeah, but by following it a couple of scenes later with that chat with Bella, it actually makes that scene, which was moving, very painful in a different way, because you're like, oh, Jack, you showed signs of genuine humanity, because you couldn't prepare for that. The sequence of events just locked together in your head, and now you've had a few hours to think about it, and you're doing that Jack Crawford thing.
Yeah,
and that becomes even more painful. That scene between them is the first level pain in it. The first level thing that's hard to watch about it is there as a husband and wife talking about her imminent demise.
Yeah.
But now it's underscored with the fact that he's rehearsing as he's talking almost.
Yeah.
He's doing
the thing that she knows. Yes. This is why she doesn't tell him. She knows that he's going to do it, which is that he makes it about him. He makes
which is why she doesn't tell him, right?
Yeah, it's not quite that he makes it about his pain. He doesn't say, the main problem here is that I'm going to be upset that my wife's died. But he makes it about, what can I do?
Yes, he makes it about his process, doesn't he? About his assumption of the way reality should be. So this is what happens.
He has that whole big conversation with Hannibal, where Hannibal very deftly, but he's obviously zeroed straight in on it, that the thing that's getting at Jack is that events are out of his control. Yep. And he tells him to take control, which is ironic because that's what Jack Crawford just does in every situation. And the thing that's upsetting him now is that he doesn't feel that he can because things are out of it. And it's a wonderful portrait of a marriage, of a relationship in just this episode, because
and she knows, doesn't she? As
portrayal.
Well, she knows.
She knows it's going to happen. Yeah, she knows and she knows he doesn't. She knows he doesn't mean anything by it. She knows it's not that he doesn't love her. It's not that he's a bad man or anything like that.
No.
He just can't help it. He just dominates and controls.
That's the way he is. She says it in her first session with Hannibal. She says it. She says to Hannibal, Jack, basically, he accused me of having an affair by not accusing me of having an affair. It's really, absolutely. This is the way he
draws
operates.
Bella as this incredibly impressive, poised, graceful, accomplished woman.
I love her.
And yet, also at the same time, clearly on some level, not on a crude level, but on some level, afraid of her husband under his thumb.
Yeah.
She's been beaten down by the force of this man's personality.
Yeah.
The strength of his control over her, and the just the amount of air and space that he takes up in the room and the relationship. And it's not cruelty, it's not abuse or anything like that. Well, I suppose it is, but it's not deliberate or conscious. But this is just what this man does.
Yeah.
And she knows, and she comes across to me as somebody, again, the actress, amazing. She comes across to me as somebody who's
Gina
trapped.
Torres,
Gina Torres, she plays it as somebody who's trapped, who's just helpless, who just said ages ago, "Well, I can't get out of this."
But what's delightful about her performance is, because I agree totally with what you're saying, but there are flickers of passion. So there's a flicker of a passion in the moment in the dinner scene, and what you realize in the moment when Bella has a flicker of passion is not only the fact that all her surrounding scenes are almost played in Mirror of Jack, where she cools down, but you realize that for me personally, the reason that I feel attracted even to these troublesome characters like Chilton and Freddie Lowndes is they have something that Entree lacks, which is passion. Everyone else is so super controlled. They are trying to be super controlled, as in Will's case. Hannibal needs those structures. Jack is a master at control and manipulation and dominating. And that's why I think also the crew, the sort of CSI Baltimore crew, that and even they're scurrying away in the moment that Jack mentioned earlier, that because that they are passionate characters, so they become like children.
Yeah.
Freddie Lowndes is like a child. Chilton's like a child.
Yeah.
It's the family thing again, but they all
Will,
have flickers of
obviously.
something that have not been stamped out of them by the Entree, which is they have passion still, and their passions make them human, despite all their frailties, despite all their transgressions, despite all the things that aren't particularly likable about them. But no wonder that they. I mean, for me, those characters get in more because, I've got an affection for them or a sympathy for them because they've got their humanity is so much more clear.
Yeah, and you see the dynamic. Jack Crawford's very particular dynamic played out again and again. You get this echoing happening. Him and Bella, him and Will, him and Miriam Lass, right? What he's even attempting to do with Hannibal, right? I mean, I know he does become sincerely, I think, friendly with Hannibal, but he's still using Hannibal, right? Or attempting to.
He just can't help himself. That's just what he is. It's just he just uses people.
That's it.
He takes up all the air in any given room, and he takes people over, and he controls them, and he uses them. Yeah. And in some degree or another, he's even conscious of it and frustrated by it.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
As in one of the conversation where he turns up at Hannibal's distressed, and it's partly that, even though he doesn't quite vocalize that. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
Fishburne is like a singularity. I mean, his presence in a scene because he's so still, and because he's got that deep, resonant voice, and because he holds gazes. I mean, these are all the things that Mads does, but Mads does them in a puckish way.
Yeah.
So Crawford becomes like an odd sort of lodestone in every scene. He just sucks gravity and everything towards him, and that
in the same way that Hannibal
largely
does,
the performance.
Right? In a different way, in a different vein, but with a similar power, which is why it's so wonderful at the end of the beginning and the end of season 2 when they deliberately hurl these two cataclysmic forces together, right?
Well, Hannibal's a supernova, and Jack's like a black hole.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? I mean, also the other
immovable object and an unstoppable force.
Yeah. I mean, taking it out of the fiction for a moment, the reason that sequence is as good as it is because Lawrence Fishburne and Mads Mikkelsen both have fight training. They've done a lot of fighting, and they kept pushing. Apparently, they were both like, "Oh, come on, when are we going to have the big fight? When are we gonna get to throw down? Come on, we've got to have it. We've got to do it. This is what's building between us, right? It's not, it's a fight between friends, between friends who have been revealed to one another in terms of their most intimate motivations and manipulations of one another. We need to do this, and that's part of why it's so bloody good when it happens.
Yeah. And yet, for all that we've been saying, the thing that struck me rewatching Coquilles is that we are led right up to the point of thinking, well, we've established all this stuff we've just been talking about with Jack and Bella and Jack's relationships with everybody, and then again it's emphasized again with Miriam. We are led to view Jack and Will's relationship in a certain way. We are led to see Jack as the father. We are, in the sense that it's a marriage, we are led to see Jack as the husband. That is to say, the dominant partner. And I'm talking about husband-wife relationships, like the husband is inherently the dominant, and I don't think there's anything essential, to human beings like that. No. But that's how it works in patriarchal families. And in that sense, we are being brought to that. We have lots of language about how people perceive Jack treating Will, and think there's the line about Hannibal says that Jack thinks of Will as Dresden China, that has to, that is inherently sort of feminizing of Will. It's inherently masculinizing and father husband of making it seem that way about Jack. Like, Will is the beautiful fragile thing that is there to be treasured, used. It's implicitly putting a husband wife construction on their relationship, and we start to see echoes in their relationship of Jack's relationship with Bella. And yet the weird thing is, when you get to the end of Coquilles, I think you realize that the relationship is actually the other way around. In a strange way, it is Will who is the husband, so to speak. It is Will who is the dominant partner. And again, Will isn't trying to do that. He's not conscious of it in exactly the same that Jack isn't. But he is completely dominating Jack Crawford. He is completely, like I was talking before, Will constantly tries to get Jack to fire him, essentially, because he thinks I shouldn't be doing this anymore. It's not good for me. But he doesn't really want to be fired. So Jack obeys the actual aim, the actual desire, which is to keep bringing Will into this thing, which is what Will actually wants. Will is dominating him, controlling him. Yeah. And you get at the end of Coquilles, you get a direct parallel where Jack is going through something and he's silent about it. He can't talk about it because he knows the way people will talk to him and take over if he does talk about it. So he sits silent. And Will comes along and just intrudes his presence on Jack Crawford and says, I'm going to sit here until you tell me. And it doesn't work in that scene, but it's the same maneuver. It's the same sort of trying to shove yourself in, shove your personality in and on top and say your feelings are going to have to bend around me. You're going to have to tell me so that I can take control of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting note on Will's positionality within not just the show, but the entire dynamic to every other character, because he does operate from a state of dominance. It's a quiet dominance, it's a subtle dominance, but because of his condition, right? Because of this capacity that he has, he can know people in a way they don't even know themselves. So he is always operating from a position of superiority, right? From a position of power, whether he wants to or not.
Yeah, it's like he's got sort of CCTV cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
So he knows what everybody else is doing and thinking all the time.
That's it. I mean, it's something Hannibal sees, of course. It's something Hannibal sees and actually really likes.
That's an interesting point that you put it that way, Jack, because actually it's one of the things that I think is very effective about the very last shot of Entree, to read Will that way and then to put that last shot in an observatory. It's just such a wonderfully cruel joke. You can see everything but what's under your nose. You can you think you've got the ability to see into every murder scenario, everyone's personality, the motivations, everyone. And here I put something right under your nose. And you can't read it. And that is ouch.
I mean, it's the game as well. I mean, it's such a fascinating game that Hannibal is playing here as well, because there's almost, you can read the whole thing with Miriam Lass as certainly not when he first takes her, but later on when he reintroduces her to Jack Crawford via the phone calls and whatnot, as a very peculiar, a very Hannibal flavored kindness, in the sense that he's trying to provide Jack with something that will distract him from his preoccupations with Bella and her cancer. Something else to chew on, something else to follow, right?
I think it's fascinating as well that Hannibal has to kill Miriam Lass out of reaction, because that must gnaw at him, because that is not something Hannibal enjoys doing.
Will come up later,
That
but
is,
yes, it's interesting, his dynamic to Miriam Lass, because he doesn't dislike Miriam at all. No. Obviously, he's actually quite impressed with her. Of course he is, because she's a
proto-Will.
Yeah, she kind of finds him, right?
Yeah, she's a proto-Will.
She takes over the role of Will in Red Dragon, because the scene where she goes to see Hannibal, she sees the wound man drawing on the table, and then Hannibal attacks her. That's actually how Will catches Hannibal in the
almost
verbatim.
Of Red
Dragon. Yes,
almost verbatim, right down to the approach from behind with the lack of shoes and everything. Yeah, that's straight down the line.
I'd be fascinated to know the direction and that was given to Anna Chlumsky. Can't pronounce that, Chlumsky, because she's dropped into a show that's already running, and she is the Entree. It is a preamble. It is a prologue to what we know. It's a flashback, and yet everything about her choices, how she plays Lass, are very, very curious, and I mean, clearly, it's one of those situations where Fuller and the others, they have provided her with enormous amounts of detail that we never see nor hear about. But I was fascinated, not so much in the rather ostentatious way that they establish her in the first scene with Jack. That's just shorthand. But all the way through, the actress, I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word actress. The actor's way of holding herself, her physicality, her everything. She's sending a lot of really interesting signals, and yet this is a character that I believe doesn't appear again.
Oh no, she does.
Oh, she does.
She does.
I can't remember. You see, so that might actually, that future information might make sense of what I saw the other night. But that's intriguing in itself, because I have no recollection of her coming back.
It's a thankless role, actually. I do feel
it really
sorry for
is,
Anna
isn't it?
Schlumpsky. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insulting, but I do have difficulty saying that name. Schlumpsky. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Anna
yeah.
Schlumpsky.
Yeah,
it's great.
She's very good, but it's a thankless role. It's like
it totally
you're dropped into this series as a bit character. Your role, at least at the start, is to just sort of be there for 5 minutes and then be immediately taken off the board. You're deliberately invoking a much more famous performance by a much more famous actress. And then later on, when she comes back, she has to play Miriam as essentially brain damaged by brainwashing, doesn't she?
Massively traumatized. I mean,
it's coming back to me now.
It's a real poison chalice of a role, and
it really is. I mean, to be told, like, you know, oh, you're going to be playing the Clarice Starling of this Hannibal series. Oh my God, no, this is insane. This is amazing. And actually, what they've done is really beaten down that character.
She would have done what I expect most actors do. She will have bought herself something nice on Friday, and then gone, oh well, hopefully the next role will be better.
But I do love the performance. She's playing it.
I love the performance.
She's playing it with, it seems to me, what always comes back to me is a line from, I don't know whether it's in the book, but it's certainly in the films, where Anthony Hopkins, Lecter, says to her, when he has a go at her, effectively, when he says, you're so ambitious, aren't you? And he rolls off all of this entire backstory for her, you know, how she had to get out, to get away from where she was living, all the way to the FBI. And that's kind of Miriam Lass, isn't it? She's playing it with this kind of like nervous, naive, but powerful ambition.
It seems to be very eager for Jack Crawford's approval and contact with him, doesn't she? That's
very much
that seems to be how the actress is and I think it's in the script. She's picking up that and running with it. She seems to almost be sort of reaching out to Jack Crawford, be my mentor, be my father figure.
Again, like there is this sort of little girl and daddy thing going on here, isn't there? There really is.
Jack, because he can't help himself, he deliberately uses cruelty and bats her away in order to get her to be a very short
interview if you keep correcting me. Is that what he says?
Yeah. And then later on, of course, he really has hostile. You know, he uses carrot and stick methodology.
Yeah. She comes in for no reason at all. He's stern and hostile and dismissive and judgmental. But the point of the exercise is obviously that at the end of that conversation, he gets what he wants, which is for her to go off and, you know, in a way that's entirely deniable for him, do something that he legally can't do. It's pretty Machiavellian, really.
Find the Chesapeake Ripper, which she does.
Yeah. And in a small way, she, just in that scene with Hannibal, she lifts the lid on one of the darkest horrors of patriarchy, which you were talking about earlier, Jack, in that sense of, here is a professional woman doing a professional job that she has every right to do, and all I can do is sit there going, don't be in a room with a man you don't know, don't be in a room with a man you know. But she has to, it's her work. Now I know we also have a little bit of awareness of who and what Hannibal is, but it's still so there's such a crackle in anything when I find in fiction, in books, in television and film, when a woman on her own enters the domain of a man she doesn't know, and already I'm on edge. And it's like, this is the lifting of the lid on something very, very horrible that exists in real life. And I remember my partner saying once to me, and it really threw me. It made me realize our enormous privileges, which she said, I'm probably misquoting it, but she said something along the lines of, every woman knows deep down that if they're with a man, he can kill her. And my jaw hit my chest. And she said, and it doesn't matter what their relationship is. And I just remember being like shell-shocked by that comment. And it's like, wow.
it's that feminist maxim, isn't it? Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Kill them.
Exactly
Yes,
that,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And it really hits home with such force in scenes like that, because obviously we are aware how a scene like that will play out because we're familiar with the character of Hannibal. But but you're still on such edge. But what a scene like that sets up is, well, what are our ways out of this scene? Well, our way out of this scene is that a woman never gets put in that position. Well, that's putting a woman in a box. That's saying she can't be doing this, that, and the other. And yet
which is literally what Hannibal does.
Which Hannibal, yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, this show is I said it, like the observatory sequence. It really loves playing on these kind of macabre visual jokes. It's rather like the night nurse who's really smelling her way to Dover at one point. And I was like, wow, we're doing the Lear thing here, out vile jellies, and then she's crawling along. That scene.
That does for me. That's a really gruesome scene. It's
grueling.
Scenes in the show which really push me, I think, further back than because, and it's that one which I'd forgotten about, and it's also the scene, because I get it confused with the much tamer version in Hunter, in which Dollarhide bites the tongue.
Oh yeah.
It's like, those two macabre moments which I can barely handle.
Yes.
Well, it's right. It's smack in my zone of stuff that I find it almost impossible to deal with. It's that prolonged fear and torture thing that I find it very hard to cope with. I in the horror genre, that's the thing. It's like prolonged scenes of torture and terrorization. That's where I just wimp out, and I'm
me too.
Very, very comfortable with that as well. I'm very comfortable with wimping out.
Totally.
There's a tremendous swathe of horror that I've just not. And for someone who loves it as a genre, I've spent most of because I've had a lighter this week. I've gone back to a lot of I guess what I was saying to you earlier would be termed vintage horror now, which I guess is anything before the 21st century. And I've been having a great time, but it's all that stuff that's in a zone I find thrilling rather than. Although I was really knocked out by I've been watching some Cronenberg, and my tendency towards Cronenberg is towards things like Videodrome, but I watched some of his earlier stuff, and my God, The Brood is a fucked up film. I think
isn't it just
incredibly rich?
Isn't it just?
That film, when it comes to gender, family, motherhood, having children, paedophobia, wow, that film is loaded.
Everything he does he doesn't do anything unless it's just freighted with so much significance.
And I ended up having a very good time with that film. But the one that was the saying about being a wuss, the one that was the sort of personal triumph, was finally, after all these years of, as a kid, being traumatized by the video cover in the old VHS video store, I finally watched Scanners.
The exploding head, the best exploding head in cinema
ever seen. Because it's the power, it's the potency of seeing certain images when you're a child. Because that video cover was so unsettling to 5-year-old me or whatever it was, that I've never got around to seeing that film. And it is, it's an old film now, and I had a rather good time with it.
Yeah, as Cronenberg's milieu goes, that's actually one of the more tame in terms of its imagery.
Absolutely, yeah. I was quite amused. I said it takes something. It says something about Cronenberg, how his answer to Star Wars, because they are effectively Jedis, to do it by the parallax view, which is such a Cronenberg thing. And then I jumped out of Cronenberg today and rewatched Dawn of the Dead for the first time in about 30 years.
The original one,
the mid-80s one, the theatrical cut. And I haven't seen that in 30 years.
There are 3 cuts, and the theatrical one is the best, and Romero's favorite as well.
Yeah, I ended up really, because I'd said to Jack at one point that I said, I wish there's about 15 minutes of this that I think they could get rid of, and Jack said, well, which one are you watching? And I said, I'm watching the theatrical cut. Now, when I got into the final reel, I thought, no, actually that kind of works, but interesting then, because I didn't know until Jack informed me that there are other versions that are longer, and that film doesn't need to be longer. It's absolutely, there's just a little moment where about 10 minutes gets a bit flabby, but it's over quite quickly. But the idea of putting more material in that, no, it's just about right, actually. So there we go. But yes, I can't, so I had a good time with all those this week, but there is an awful lot of stuff that I just can't face. I'm such a wuss.
I always find that it tends to be about framing for me. I mean, like visual violence and images of bodily mutilation generally don't bother me that much unless there's freight behind them. There's some kind of weight, and that's what does it here. There's just something about the way it's done.
Yeah,
the lighting,
the images of like the bodies with the skin pulled up to resemble wings and then suspended on fish hooks and everything. I mean, I appreciate how well done it is, and I appreciate that. I sort of know intellectually that it's a shocking image, and I can appreciate it on that level. But it doesn't upset me. I'm not actually shocked by it. The image of the nurse after her eyes have been put out, crawling across the floor, trying to escape. That's a bit too much. I find horrible. I can barely bring myself to look at the screen, because it's about a person suffering, about the worst thing you can imagine somebody suffering.
And you just have that as well. I mean, that's the other
empathic response.
It's
and one is operatic
pointless,
as well, and the other is feels within the boundaries of possibility, and those. And that divide comes in as well, and then you start to feel very uncomfortable.
It's the arbitrariness of it as well, from Abel Gideon's perspective. Why is he really doing this? It's kind of a wheeze, isn't it? It's a lot.
It is. Yeah, and therefore it becomes rather pathetic. But then it's been pathetic with consequences.
Exactly that.
So it throws up an enormous.
Directly from the books as well. From the books. This is something Hannibal does. He doesn't actually physically do it. It's described in retrospect, but it is something he does to one of the nurses. I think in the books she does survive. He takes her eyes and her tongue, I believe, in the books, and does it surgically. But she does survive in the books.
In a way, Abel Gideon in that episode gets closer to something of the real world serial killer, that the famous serial killers, in the sense that the ones that have been incarcerated and then had profiles done about them and interviews done, the one thing that very often comes is the old Hannah Arendt thing, but it does stand up, is how small and boring and banal
and petty
they are,
and
petty, like your Nilsons or whatever.
Exactly.
But with
really, Hannibal is that, isn't he? In the original story, certainly in the Silence of the Lambs. I mean, that's it. The scene where Hannibal escapes in Silence of the Lambs from the sort of holding cell. He gets one of the policemen helpless, and he beats him to death with his own truncheon. And the way Hopkins plays it is as Hannibal enjoying sort of almost sexual ecstasy. He is visibly he is transported by the joy of being able to hurt somebody. Well, I mean, that is, as you say, a bit more like, obviously within the whole sort of fantasy schema of the story and the character, but that is a bit more like the reality of people like that. They are just sadistic and cruel and nasty because they are, small, petty, pathetic, insecure, scared people with total narcissism and not enough maturity to block their worst instincts and stuff like that. That's not what this show is getting at all. And this is where I found it quite interesting that Abel Gideon in those scenes is the closest that we've edged towards that. He kind of is that, isn't he? And
whereas all the others. No,
being and a sort of pseudo Hannibal 1.0.
Yeah, whereas the rest, the other people, they are somewhat mythologized.
They're visionaries or artists or poets.
They're alchemists. They feel that they're plugged into something esoteric, or I mean, it's still vile and horrible what they end up doing. But you see there's a a disquieting poetry into things like putting people into the soil so that they grow they grow flora and things like that.
Of course, I mean
that's an attempt at art, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
It comes of the artistic and the creative impulse, or at least they feel that it does.
That lack of vision, that lack of a wider project is essential to Abel Gideon's character, of course, because we do discover that he is not the Chesapeake Ripper, that he's been kind of led to believe that he is by Chilton and his ineptitude.
Fantastic. Love that.
Yeah, it's like Abel is wonderful because he's like an empty vessel. He doesn't know who he is, right? He is that, again, it's that metaphor of the shattered teacup, right?
Tabula rasa.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he is.
And I love how it turns, if I remember rightly anyway, it turns out to be, there's nothing really behind it. It's just Chilton deciding that this guy is the Chesapeake Ripper and sort of on faith managing to convince himself and then managing to convince the guy himself that it's true, and it's just kind of this folie à deux that comes from
exactly it. He's
comedy of errors, and
it's Chilton being inept,
malpractice,
not malevolent per se, just inept.
But it's the danger of that ineptitude which is so effective, because again, the amount of people that you can sort of list off putting into influential and senior positions, and my God, on what level?
I love the way Hannibal treats Chilton. I mean, he obviously would have a certain degree of contempt for him, but it's a well-meaning contempt. He sees him as almost like a tutor, like a favorite tutor. I'm going to bat you around a little bit, I'm going to play with you. How can I maneuver you into the most interesting and fun situation, Frederick?
And then later on,
like a patsy.
If I remember rightly, later on, because of the way this show plays around with the mythos, by the time Hannibal is incarcerated at the Baltimore State Mental Hospital, the person running it isn't Chilton; it's Alana.
That's right.
So she becomes the nemesis figure, as it were, to Hannibal in chains.
That's right.
Whereas Chilton never gets to be that.
No,
and
he never gets.
As well with Alana, they still seem that watching it as I am and try and one a week, and trying to put my awareness of how it develops out of my mind. She is the most enigmatic character at the moment.
Well,
she's the slipperiest character. That it's like, and you are left with this. Do they know quite what to do with her yet, or what's going on here? I mean, that
she develops.
She does immensely. But of course, if you're watching it in real time, it's very easy. And I often wonder what people in the chain must have been thinking, because obviously, as with all television, these things are watched by someone who's a head of department, and I wonder if there were any questions as to what are you going to do here with this character, because lovely performance, but this is the episode where it starts. These are the two episodes where, even though they include her quite a bit, you're like, your angle, what is it? It's a big question mark at the moment, and I know it will develop, but they
she
do play an
very
interestingly long game with her. And I just think it's interesting from the point of view that Fuller doesn't give the game away too quickly about her.
No, she's
quite brave.
She's a powerful, she's a powerful force. I mean, she's a powerful force because, of course, she is the one who introduces Hannibal to the group. She's the one who brings him in many respects. Will as well.
So much of what she does, unfortunately, she sort of acts as a structural joist, doesn't she?
Yeah.
It's like you kind of need somebody there to do stuff like that, introduce people to other people, and to be some sort of connection between Chilton and Hannibal and the rest of the team and so on. And I think they do struggle with Alana.
They do sometimes. I mean, the thing with Alana is exactly what you just said. She is kind of functional in many respects. She's there to drive the plot along. I mean, they do give her a lot more to work with in season 2, definitely.
Yes. The thing I like about Alana as a character is that she's very what's the word? she's very concerned about probity and integrity and doing the right things and stuff like that. And she's very convinced that she is doing that at all times. And yet she's actually very, very easily swayed by people.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating, right?
Yeah. She's very easy to sway. It happens repeatedly, like Hannibal or Jack or Will or any of them, really. It takes one conversation and really, without her realizing that she's doing it, she's going along with something that she knows is wrong, or doing something that she knows she shouldn't do. And there is a sense in which she is a bit like Chilton.
That's exactly.
She's always sort of trying to get in. You know.
Yeah, and in many ways, she is as inept as Chilton as well, right?
Yeah,
she gets so much wrong. She gets so much wrong in the show.
You could have actually cast Caroline Daverness as a gender-swapped version of Chilton. Just have, I don't know, Frederica Chilton. Have that character play the role, the sort of structural role that Alana plays. And that would be perhaps a little bit more coherent. I
suppose in many ways, you kind of do get that later on in season 3, which he takes on his role.
That's kind of supporting my position, because it seems to happen naturally that they sort of merge together in terms of their structural role in the show.
And the dynamic between that character and Hannibal, right? It becomes the same thing. It becomes what Chilton's dynamic is to him earlier on.
Yeah.
There's even like a physical transformation of Alana. She starts to dress differently or be dressed differently in the show. She holds herself.
She's very different in series 3.
Very, very different. After she, we'll get to it when we get to it, but after she's been kind of traumatized by Hannibal.
Well, she's almost literally smashed to pieces and put back together again.
Yeah. I mean, again, she has one of those symbolic deaths, right? Like, which all the characters have.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which some happen to survive or transition from. Some of them don't.
I mean, even Chilton, of course. Who effectively loses his mouth, which seems so wonderfully ironic.
Yeah. It actually is a running joke. I was watching an interview with Brian Fuller, and he was saying, like, come the 3rd season, we've done it so many times, we were like, well, we've got to do something really extreme with him in this one.
As you say, we'll get there when we get there.
Bloody hell, won't we just? We'll have to do by the end. We'll have to say, so, like, which one was your favorite, guys? Which was your favorite of Chilton's deaths?
I love it.
I've got mine.
Great.
Okay, well, I think
that was great.
Coquilles is probably my favorite episode of the series so far.
I have to agree. Just knocked me out, that one.
It's really great in so many ways, isn't it? It's great. It's like, as a standalone piece, it's brilliant. Externally, with reference to the rest of the show, it does so much.
Yeah.
It managed to achieve. I mean, in effect, it did exactly the same thing as Oof, and yet the Elliot. What was he called again? The Angel Maker. Yeah, his sequence didn't seem as truncated or as dwarfed by everything else, and yet it was. It was much more finely tuned than the. Although a very good premise, it felt a bit clunky around the Lost Boys and their surrogate mother. Whereas this time they gave the Angel Maker no more material really than the Lost Boys and their surrogate mother. It just felt much more coherent.
And it's, although I was surprised by how well the themes of Earth were integrated with each other, this is much more integrated.
This is much more,
Hannibal can, right the way through. It's like a spider's web. Everything is connected to everything else. Hannibal can smell cancer in the same way that Buddish can sense evil in people that he just walks past. And there's so many of these connective tissues between almost everything that's done and said. Yes. It feels so. It's one of those things that's so well written. It feels almost like it was spun rather than actually written.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And I love really beautiful.
I love things that end the way this ends, things that just wind down and sort of end in failure mode. Because one of the things Earth does is Earth leads you to the sort of traditional conclusion, the dramatic confrontation, the shootout, the standoff, whatever, the SWAT team break in, and there's guns, and it doesn't really work. It's sort of it's skipped over a bit despite building up to it, and it leaves you feeling a bit unsatisfied. This very deliberately goes towards that to a certain point and then winds down into failure mode, and it just becomes essentially it just becomes a tragedy. It just becomes this quiet, sad, exactly, the world ends with a whimper. And it fits everything. It fits with Bella's impending death and the failure of Jack's marriage, and everything seems to be winding down to just this moment of failure and silence at the end. And me being a goth, that's fine with me.
Totally.
An old goth. That's my jam.
We love it.
No, it's a beautiful one. It is a beautiful episode, and Entree too. I mean, Entree is a wonderful episode. Entree's
great.
There's so much going on in it. There's so many key characters introduced here, and I like Elliot was saying earlier. I'd forgotten that so much is introduced in such a short time span. The Miriam Lass stuff, which is going to resonate across the next couple of seasons. Chilton introduced, Gideon introduced. He's going to be one of the most significant characters right up until the end of the show.
Very
I
important
love
character.
as well. Just as an aside, I love the way Freddie Lounge strutted down that corridor of cells.
I'm straight. I'm gay, but my God, she's so gorgeous. She is stunning.
I just think even the touch of they gave her the leather gloves.
Oh,
and it's like I don't really understand all the signifiers in this, but I just love the way she's strutting down.
I love her hair. Oh my God, I love her hair so much, and the way it's done in this show, and the way they give her contrasting colors. She's often in green coats, green leather coats, and what? Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
I will say something actually, because it's just occurred to me because my partner noticed it, and it sort of tallies with rhymes. Sorry, the words are all mixed up tonight. With Jack about his, the Virginia Andrews books and everything. My partner is convinced, and I've got to check. We watched. She said they've changed the color scheme in Hannibal's office. I said, have they? She said, I think they've done that twice. And she said either he's a very prodigious redecorator, or they're trying to signify something. So I've got to keep an eye on that now. But she said no, that accent wall there was green last week, and now it's a kind of purple.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
I didn't know. Which of course then chimes with what you were saying earlier, George, about the whole series existing on this kind of fault line of the real, the metaphysical, the implied, the
being like a liminal space,
the highly subjective, which then of course then rhymes with what Jack was saying about peculiar point of view shots. Just like that can't possibly be Budish's point of view. It is Budish's point of view shot. So it all seems to it's nicely cohesive.
Yeah, these episodes are where the show comes
this lack of cohesion.
Yeah, of course. It's the shattered teacup.
It's not unlike not unlike what Kubrick's The Shining does, and Kubrick's The Shining is another classic example of the text that stays eternally in that hesitation, between collapsing down one way or the other in its attitude towards the apparently supernatural. And it's a film that this series repeatedly invokes. It will invoke
people who are not into horror films or not into ghost stories, they said if you're into architecture, just watch The Shining, because you'll have a great time with the head fuck.
Won't you just? If what you're paying attention to in The Shining is the environment, you are going to come away feeling high.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And I think The Shining is very much in the DNA of this show. One of the things where you really see that is in its attitude towards environments and the textures and the colors of rooms and buildings and
angles,
walls and things like that.
Doorways, corridors, things like
the way in which incoherences and impossibilities in space can express instabilities in people's consciousness, and it gets very explicit, even jokey with the family relationship, particularly in the next episode, which I can't wait to talk about. Sorbet.
Great.
And that has there's a very explicit shout out to The Shining visually in the very first episode. There's another arguably even more explicit visual shout out to The Shining and Sorbet.
Great. Oh well. I'm raring to go.
Entree is a bit harder to judge on its own, I think, because it does feel like part one of something.
It's setting stuff up. This is a setup episode.
Yeah.
That's for damn sure.
But
It does it very well, but it is a setup
does it very well.
episode.
And
I
it
think
sets all
it's
sorts of
purely
things in motion.
Yeah, if I think purely in terms of timing a season, that's the perfect mid-season pickup, where you have this contemplative episode that deals with other things, and we're taking an interlude with the Hobbs situation, and then you get Entree, and it does feel like almost its own second pilot. You get obviously the flashback when it's even called Entree, for God's sake. But but it's timely. I mean, I think that for all this is a series that is very serious about being a piece of art, they're very good on knowing how to craft it for audiences. I know it wasn't a rating success, but I think it wasn't a rating success for very different. It's difficult subject matter, and it's not everyone's proverbial cuppa. But in terms of structure. I mean, that's a perfect storytelling.
It has multiple, like I say, Entree is like part one of something. Sorbet is like part two of Entree, but Sorbet is also like part one of another story. You have multiple storylines intersecting, and one starts to pick up while another is beginning, and another.
They must have had charts on walls, like they must, nobody's business, because it really is. As you say, it's dense, it's complex, and cause and effect, and some of the payoffs come a long time later.
Some of the stuff that's set up in these episodes doesn't pay off until like the end of the last season. It's really quite that profound. It really is. I mean, that sort of accidental, natural poetry that occurs. Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
It's good for me because I mean, it certainly, I said, I watched it the other night, and it sharpened some of my decision making in terms of storytelling only today. Right? You said that about character X in chapter 2. You could just leave that. That's just a little bit of context, or that's just a little bit of detail. But you watch something like Hannibal, and then the urge to, that could pay off in chapter 18 as that, and then you find yourself doing it. And so there were a couple of exciting moments today where I started to do that. I thought, well, I could just leave that there, because that's just as I say, it's just a little bit of detail about someone that I could revisit it and send it off on this tangent. And you suddenly sit back and go, I've been watching Hannibal.
It's the dialogue for me. It's the dialogue for me. It's the moment. It's that. I mean, it's another one of those things about received wisdom. Don't have characters standing around talking too much. No, you can have that and have it be brilliant. It can be absolutely wonderful.
I have a real in the marrow hatred of that thing, show don't tell. Tell don't show. I love it when people sketch backstories with little lines of dialogue, or they but I guess maybe that's a lot of, because I mean, training for one particular medium and growing up even over television, radio was a bigger feature of just the radio's on in the background, and usually something like a Radio 4. The idea of people talking about things that's just in the next room or just off stage, I get a real frisson from that. So I've never fully gone into this cast iron rule about television and film, which is show tell. Fuck that, no.
But it's the nature of dialogue as well. I mean, one of the things I love about Hannibal in general is the fact that it operates in this heightened world where people do not talk naturalistically. They talk with incredible poetry, insight, and introspection, where they can perceive and articulate their own motivations and chew them over with one another and with themselves. And I love that. I love it.
Talked about this before, but I mean, I can be a sucker for another phrase is everyday life drama or slice of life drama. However, there is this huge part of what I seek in television is I don't want to watch what you're purporting to be naturalism, because what you're purporting to be naturalism is a distortion anyway. Whereas this, one of the delights of it, and it's similarly to double bank it with something like Twin Peaks, is it has its own vocabulary, its own heightened vocabulary, heightened performances, but because the language and because the performances are just so embedded with their own kind of truth.
Yep.
You're fine with it. You in fact, you relish it. It's
Yeah.
great.
I love the self-assurance of that, don't you? I'm going to talk to you with like this. This is how I operate. This is what I'm going to be. And you learn. You're going to have to learn how to take me in that regard. I've got such an amount of respect and time for media that does that.
And I think it's probably, again, it's those early influences things. I was fed on a bit of a diet of Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre from a young age, particularly Shakespeare, and you never quite lose that the frisson around people talking in blank verse and image-laden prose or verse, and which effectively contains the stage directions in the language, and you never if it's there earlier, you never sort of lose that. And of course, then the desire to you can never read Shakespeare in your head. you've got to wait till the house is empty and start eating the language. And there's something the same way about Hannibal: the desire to eat their language, to really note particular lines, and
which, by the way, is something we could have talked about in Entree, of course, because he does serve Chiltern tongue, of course.
Yes, of course, yes. Brilliant moment.
I love that.
And he does make the quip, doesn't he? He makes the quip about your tongue is very feisty.
Yeah.
Well, it's just something about a psychiatrist serving two other psychiatrists a meal, and the dish he chooses to serve them is tongue.
Right, because and this is a guy who hates Freud, by the way.
Yeah. But then, as I said earlier, this is something that I think that the show is just good at. It does these whip-cracking visual puns and macabre jokes so effortlessly. They're never clunky. They really just. They really work.
The dishes were all real dishes as well. They were actually properly prepared dishes. You can actually prepare them and eat them.
Wow.
Oh yes, they had a food designer working specially for the show, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
I can't remember her name, but
because this is one of the things I said to my partner when we were watching. I mean, even putting aside that, I'm no longer a meat eater, I haven't been for many, many years. I said, I guess I am the inverted snob, really. I said, I find food that is presented artistically, I just have no desire to eat it. It really brings out the inverted snob in me. Those few occasions where I've ended up in somewhere which is, pretty quote unquote classy, or I don't know if I'm really enjoying this because I don't want to disturb it.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I know exactly what you mean.
Someone's been out there and worked incredibly hard on the presentation of this, and now I've got to sort of
it's too
apart,
beautiful, right? It's too beautiful somehow.
But then again, that's something in the essence of Hannibal, isn't it? Something in the series and everything. The creation and then the destruction of the creation immediately afterwards, and how he reconciles those things, and then the cruelty and the control. I mean, he absolutely welcomes the idea of, yes, I've spent 6 hours preparing this dinner, and within 20 minutes it's going to be a mess on your plate, and and that fascinates him.
And also, let's not forget, it's also the fact that he's feeding people, his victims as well, which he enjoys a great deal.
Yeah.
Get ready for the next one.
Yeah, because you're gonna see it. You're gonna. I
still remember Is it Abel Gideon's leg gets served in one episode?
Yeah, it's actually very funny. It's in a very gallows way. Yes, it's very, very funny.
And doesn't he serve it to him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Great. Right.
He cooks it. He roasts it in clay for him. Yeah.
Amazing. And again, I seem to recall it's all played as sort of like this tremendous honor.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, we'll get to it when we get to it, but like the dialogue between him and Gideon is great.
Oh, wow.
Because Gideon is kind of playing along and not. He's actually calling Hannibal on his own problems and neuroses, and he's saying, like, this is all a fairy tale for you, isn't it? What happens when the fairy tale ends, Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. It's very good. It is lots of fun. It's lots of fun. That
I've really enjoyed that. I mean, I've really enjoyed watching. I mean, it's been a really good excuse to get back into the whole thing at all. But those 2 episodes are particularly great, and I've particularly relished this chat.
No, it's been great fun. I mean, and these are the episodes I think where the show really finds itself, where it starts being what it really wants to be, and it doesn't stop from this point on. This is it. We're on the rails now.
And amen to that.
Yeah, and then particularly once you get to Sorbet, because Sorbet is, I mean, you once you get there, you can't help seeing Entree as almost a prologue to Sorbet, because Sorbet really is the moment where things go into high gear, But I don't. Yeah, I think Entree works really well. It's a very good episode. I think it's so connected to what's around it that it is hard to judge it entirely on its own terms,
like in isolation. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly,
but wait until the next episode, guys. I mean, wait until Sorbet. It is going to be one, I'm telling you.
Great.
Well, guys, before we go, is there anything you'd like to pimp out?
Beautifully put.
Beautifully put, yeah, as always. George, our pimp. Go to my Twitter if you want to, while I'm still there, @_Jack_Graham_. Give me a tiny bit of money on Patreon. You'll get advance access to everything I do before it's released, and even some exclusive things like Back Street Irregulars, which is all about the Sherlock Holmes stories, which I do with everybody listening to this knows who this is, our friend Kit Power.
Of course.
And Daniel Harper, with whom I do the podcast I Don't Speak German, which is about Nazis. And again, we're on a bit of a pause at the moment, but we are getting back to it. And you can read my stuff if you want to at Eruditorium Press, and the stuff I'm most pleased with I curate at my Substack, which is called Times Carcass. There's an essay I wrote about the TV series Legion, in which I talk a little bit about some of the things that I've talked about in this show, including there's some stuff in that essay about Hannibal and its relationship to Todorov and this sort of thing. So maybe I'll link to that, because that's I'm quite pleased with that essay. Anyway, and by the time you hear this, my episode with David Fagiani on the Escape Goat podcast will be out, and that's me talking to him about a novel that I'm fascinated with, and which strangely got things in common with Hannibal, actually. Agatha Christie's, and then there were none. While we've been talking, I've been sort of hearing resonances that go back to that book. So
interesting.
That's my stuff anyway.
Brilliant. So, links below, guys, as per usual.
Yeah. Well, I've left the musky odor of Twitter now through
it's probably for the best, to be honest.
Frustration. So I've got nothing to plug via Twitter. In fact, I've got pressure to
it's a dumpster fire.
Unlike Jack and Graham, Jack Graham and George. I am a work-shy fop. So my stuff is to be found where it's usually found. So if you want to pass away a few hours on a long car journey or something, I've got audiobooks in the place where you find audiobooks that I've narrated. And if you're absolutely sick and to death with my voice as I am, there's others that I've produced, which is kind of still being nice to me, but you don't actually have to hear me. I've still got something coming up, which I'm still under wraps, but that will be in a forthcoming episode maybe, and it will be niche, but at least I can talk about it.
Excellent. Once again, guys,
rich, velvety, actory tones. Come on.
Yes.
Once again, guys, links below. As for myself, as per usual, you can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy, where there's lots going on at the moment. You can find me over at the new channel on Our Lives in Horror, where I talk to various creators from the independent horror genre, which is lots and lots of fun. Links to all of my published work can be found over at strangeplaygrounds.com, or if you go over to the Evil Empire of Amazon and type in George Daniel Lee, you'll find all of my short story collections available over there. very, very soon. I think in about 6 weeks' time, I'm going to have 2 new short stories published in anthologies from Kevin J. Kennedy Publications. There will be links everywhere, all over this channel when they come out, obviously, when they're up for pre-order. And I am still, I mean, like Jack, I am still clinging there onto Twitter. You can still find me over there, whether you'd want to or not, at the Enigmatic Elegy channel. Guys, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was
really good fun.
Much.
Thank you so
that
much.
Was grand. And thank you guys for listening along. Until next time, bye-bye.